Welcome to another episode of the comprehensive Primavera tutorials in which we focus on different aspects of planning and controlling your project through the Primavera software. One of the most crucial steps in project management is related to the cost management, as there are different types of cost in each project. Therefore, in this episode, we will focus on cost management in Primavera software, in which we provide various tips and tricks that you can apply to your real project in order to handle different costs. One of the most important part of cost management in every project is related to the fixed costs that we have for each task. As you know, we had a different task in our project from E1 to C3, which were related to the engineering, procurement, and construction. For each task, we have the fixed cost, and we want to see how we can handle the fixed costs related to each task in Primavera. This is the view of our activities. As you can see, for each activity, we have the tabs, which is called expenses. In the expenses tab for each activity, we can allocate its fixed cost. There are some important points which we have to keep in mind before entering the data. One of them is related to the cost account, and the other one is related to the expense category. We should know how we can define the cost account and the expenses category for our project. In different projects, you may have different cost accounts in which you allocate the associated cost to that special accounts. That's why we can define different cost accounts. It gives us flexibility in terms of financial management, in which we can support our project from different cost accounts. In order to actually define the cost accounts, we have to come to the Enterprise tab, and here we can click on cost accounts, and after that, as you can see, this tab will appear for you. Then I want to add my cost account. For example, I put the name as the EPC cost account. And for example, you can enter the ID number of your cost account, and then I save it. So now I define one cost account for my project. However, based on different situations, you can define different cost accounts for different projects. The other parts here, it's related to the expense category. As you know, we have something here which we call admin categories. As I told you, the admin categories is related to different categories that you can have in your project. For example, we talked about units of measure in previous sections. We also talk about the notebook topics, and you can see for each concept in Primavera, we can define our own categories. For example, in terms of expense categories, you can see different expenses in terms of the traveling, training, software, shipping, and other types have been defined. However, you can define your specialized expenses here. For example, I write EPC cost as the specific expense category in my project. So keep in mind, in your project, before entering the fixed cost, you should define the cost account and of course the expenses categories if they have not been in the predefined of the Primavera. So now it's time to enter the data about the fixed cost for each activities. Now I click on E1, and as you can see, this view is related to the E1 activity. In the expenses tab, as you can see, I can add a difference record for my cost, which was stated for this special project. For example, I name it as the fixed cost, and in terms of the cost account, as you can see, I allocate the cost account which I had defined in previous section, and in terms of expense category, I put the EPC cost for this category. There is one item which is related to the actuarial type. In terms of the cost policy that you have in your project for different things, you can choose you want to actually pay the money of that special funds at the end of the activity, a start of the activity, or during the activities. It ups to you based on the policy that you have for your project. For example, we since this is a fixed cost, we choose the uniform over the activity. Here, this is the place which we want to enter the fixed cost as a budgeted cost which we have for this activity, and it was the 8,000. I click on that, and that's it. I could enter the data about task E1. As you can see, you have to follow this step exactly in the same way for other activities, and maybe that would be a little time consuming, since you have to set up some fixed data like the expense item, cost account, and expense category. In order to expedite your process, there's a trick in which you can copy this record by clicking on Control and C bottom at the same time, and then you go to for task E2, and as you can see, you click on Control and V in order to paste that value, and just here you change the value of the budgeted cost actually, which is 2,000 for task E2. Let's go to task E3 again the same way, and just I change the budgeted, which is 5,000. Then I go to task E4, just I change to actually 1,000. Then it's time to go to actually task E. We check task E4, task E5, Control V, and then for 1,000. Then for the procurement, for P1, again, I put 2,000. Again, the same for P2, Control V, and 3,000. Then for P3, again you go enter 5,000, and because this is easy, you can continue up to the last activity, which is C3. So in this way you can enter the fixed cost for each activities. After entering all data about the fixed cost, as you can see, now we are in the activities view. There is also one view here which is called expenses, and you can go to this view. As you can see, all the fixed costs which we have defined for our EPC are in our accessibility from this view. You could also enter the data in this view too. In the next step, we are going to see that how we can handle the variable costs in our project in terms of resources or activities, and how we can enter them in the Primavera software. Consider a scenario in which we have variable costs For example, for two resources, resource D and resource E. For these two resources, based on the project policy, we have two kinds of costs. For example, imagine that the standard and overhead factor, which we defined in previous sections, were for all locations except location B. And location B, in terms of the special circumstances, it has different standard and maybe the different overrate. However, for example, for resource fee, the overrate is as same as the usual location, but for resource E, the overrate is been changing too, because it was 2 for the usual location. However, for location B, it's less than 2. You can have this scenario in different situations in your project in which different costs have been defined. In this scenario, just we consider that some activities are executing in different locations, and because of those locations we have different costs. Now we want to see how we can define different costs for the same resource in the Primavera software, and how we can allocate this different cost in our project. It is clear that we have to have a special column in the activities in which it is stated which activity is going to be executed in location B. However, now we do not have this column. Therefore, I want to use this situation to teach you the global changing in Primavera software, which enables you to have the powerful flexibility in terms of defining different things. First of all, imagine that I want to have the column in which that is the location ID, and if it is 1, it's the representative of the location B. In order to actually define different columns for your project, you have to come to the Enterprise tab, and here we have user defined fields. I click on user defined fields, and here I can add one field. For example, I call this location ID, and imagine that the type of this new column is number. Then I click on close, and now just I have defined the new column. It's time to add this new column to this view. In order to do that, I come to the columns, and here as you can see, I can add different columns to my view. I come to the user define, and as you can see, now I have the location ID. I add location ID, and I want to see this location ID. Imagine that after the schedule complete here, and I click on OK. As you can see, now I have add the location ID. Imagine that, for example, the task E1, it's in location 1, which is the representative of the location B, and of course, for example, the P1, it's a different location. By doing this, you can add different columns to your project that can be whatever you want in whatever data type that you need in your project, from text to numbers and also other types. So by this scenario, just I add the location ID. In the next step, it's time to add the name of my location. For example, imagine that I want to see the location B behind the location ID in order to make it easier to have this visibility. So after defining the locations, it's time to see how we can define different costs for resource D and E. Before go through defining the different costs, let me show you something in the admin preferences. By clicking on admin preferences, as you can see, we have something here in terms of rate types. These rate types helps us to have different price units. In the simple scenario, if we do not have any variable cost which is changing by different situation, we can use only the price unit. However, in scenarios that we have changing in price, we can use the price unit, for example, type 2, type 3, in order to define our prices. So in the next step, we go to the resources, and as you can see, now we want to define difference cost for resource D. Here, we do not have the other column about different prices. Therefore, I have to add new columns. I right click here and customize resources. And here, as you can see, I can add different units for my prices. For example, here, because based on the project policy, just we have two types of prices. Therefore, I add it and put it after the unit price 2, and I click on OK. It was stated that for resource D, the price unit 2 in terms of 250 is 300. So I click on OK. And as you can see, I changed the price from 250 to 300. Then for resource E. Again, for resource E, we can have different price unit. And it was stated that it's not 200 and it is 300. So I change it. And also it was stated that we have change in terms of the growth for the price unit. And that change would be 5% after the 17th of November. Therefore, here I have to have this change for the second prices, which would be after the considering that 5%, it would be 350. And by this thing, I can handle different price units. Then after this step, when you come here, you can see that we have two activities, E1 and P1, in which the expenses would be different for resource D and E, because they are implementing in different locations. So we have to consider this point in allocating different prices. So for task E1, by clicking on task E1, as you can see here, for resource A, because this task is in location B, we have to change the rate type. By default, it is on the price unit. However, by clicking on that, you can choose the price unit too, and therefore that would be changed for your task E1 in terms of the cost. By this way, you can define different prices and allocate different prices to different tasks. And then it's time to check out the task P1. As you can see here, we have task P1 and we have resource D. Then I can click and assign the different prices for my resource D. This is the way in which you have flexibility in terms of defining different variable costs based on different policies that you have in your project in Primavera software. In addition to fixed and variable cost in your project, sometimes you may have special costs which you have to assign in your project. One of these costs is called overhead cost. As you know, the overhead cost in each project is not related to this specific task, and you have to allocate it to the entire project. For example, in this special project, we have the overhead cost per day of 30,000, and which is independent from activities. It means that you shouldn't allocate these costs to special activities. We want to see how we can allocate the costs which are independent from the specific activities in the project in Primavera software. Since the overhead cost is not based on the special activities, we need to define a new activities for the entire of our project. Therefore, I click on the add item here and I name it as the summary. And the most important point is that when you click on summary and in the general view, you can see different activities type. The type of this summary, it's not the task dependent or resource dependent. It's exactly the WBS summary because we want to have these special tasks in order to allocate the type of cost such as overhead, which we cannot allocate to a specific task. So keep in mind before allocating this kind of task that you should define the summary task in Primavera software, and then you can define that task. In the next step, we go to the project expenses part, and here we want to define the actually overhead cost. By clicking on the positive icon, as you can see, now I can assign this fixed cost to the summary task. I call this as the overhead, and as you can see, now I have defined the overhead cost for my project. In order to define the value of overhead cost, I click on overhead cost, and in the detail tab I come to the cost tab. Here I have to enter the budgeted unit and the price unit. As you know, it was stated the overhead cost for this project it's 30,000 per day. And since our project the original duration has been calculated 40 days, we can conclude that we should multiply this unit to the duration of our project. This original duration has been calculated based on the critical path concepts, which automatically the Primavera calculated for us exactly in the same way that MSP software can do that. So for the budget unit, I have to actually enter the 40 days, and for the price unit I have to enter the 3,000. By clicking on that, as you can see, the budgeted cost for the overhead cost can be calculated. So for this special cost which you cannot allocate to the specific task, the solution is to define the summary task and then allocate that cost to the entire of your project. As the last point of the financial management, we want to point out some important hints in terms of the budget management. In addition to the overall cost of your project, which the Primavera software calculated for you based on different costs which you entered for activities, for overall cost and other costs, and by having that number you can add whatever percentage of your profit in order to calculate the revenue that you have. You can handle this issue in Primavera software and allocate the revenue that you have to the entire project, which we are going to see that in a minute in Primavera. As I told you, based on the cost which we have entered in the Primavera, we have the budgeted total cost. This is the cost of our project. However, we should add the 20% in terms of the profit to calculate the overall revenue. By dividing the budgeted total cost to the actually 80%, we can consider that 20% profit for our project. After considering this value, we can go to the project expenses and here we can define the revenue and the budget that we want to have in our project. We allocate this revenue to the summary again by clicking on summary, and for example I call it as the budget, and here in the cost I can enter the values. Keep in mind, since the type of this budget it's revenue type, you should enter this value in the negative format. However, for the overhead, because it was in the type of cost value, we entered in the positive format because by default the cost is considered in this view. But for the budget, it's enough that you enter that calculated value by considering the 20% for the profit and then enter it in the negative format. These were the principal concepts for the cost management that you have in your project. However, there are some more details which we will cover in the upcoming videos.